Hello and welcome to the EzyRoulette tutorial. In the previous video, we have successfully set up the MongoDB database for our server, and today I'll be showing you how to handle the login request that our Unity client sent to our server. And without further ado, let's get started. Okay, let's open the EzyRoulette plugin, source, main, controller, user login controller. This is where our login request is handled. And before we have successfully extracted the username and password from the event. And now, first of all, I'll delete this log and I'll create a local variable username, which is event.getUsername, and get password. But in practice, we actually don't want to store the plain text password to our database. So we need to encode the password before storing in our database. So I'll call encode password and then create the encode method, right? And this basically returns the EZSA256.crypt UTF to lowercase and pass in the password. It's just that simple. Okay. And now I want to check whether our user exists in our database or not. And to do that, I need to use the user service. So this one we have created before, user service. And this is a singleton class, so I can call ezyAutoByte. Okay, and from here we have created the user entity as well. So I'll create let user equal to user service dot get user, pass in the username. Okay, import class, and we haven't created the get user method yet, so let's create it now. Okay, seems good. And we need to implement this method in the user service import. Okay, we just need to return user repo. Okay, let's define the user repo first. Private user repo Autobyte. Let's return user repo dot find by field username. Okay, let's open the user repo. This one need to extend the easy Mongo repository. We forget to do this before, with the ID of type long and the data type of user. Okay, it's just that. And now it automatically has the find by field method. Alright, go back to our login controller. So to check whether the user exists in our database or not, we only need to check if user equal to null. It means user doesn't exist in the database. So I'll log something. User doesn't exist in DB. Create a new one. Okay, so for simplicity, I'll let the system automatically create a new user if that one doesn't exist in our database, so that we don't need the register function. Okay, let's user equal to user service dot create user, username and password. And let's create the create user method with the username and password, and of course implement it in the user service import. In this method, we first need to define a new user and we need to set the ID for it, which is the mock ID service dot increment and get, pass in the ID user. Okay, actually we don't need a mock ID service, we need a mock ID repo. Let's create it by using private easy mock IDs repository, mock ID repository. Okay, and bind it. Right. Okay, I'll call it mock ID repo. And then I need to set the user password as well. Set password with the password, and user dot set username and username. And then we need to call user repo dot save user, so that it stores our user record in our database, and then return user. Alright, go back to user login controller. So basically, if the user didn't exist, we create a new one. And if the user did exist but the password is not equal to the new one, okay, if the password didn't match with the one that is stored in our database, we need to throw a new exception, easy login error exception, with the easy login error that invalid password constant. Okay, and then I'll log in for user and password match, accept username. Okay, so if the password didn't match, we throw an error. Otherwise, we log that user and password match and accept that user. So our login logic is just that simple. And now let's test it. Let's run our server. Okay, I'll expand this one so that you can see it more clearly. And go back to our Unity client, run it. Then enter the username and password. Okay, before that, I want to show you the MongoDB Compass, which is a user interface for our MongoDB. Okay, you can see our database now is the EzyRoulette, and it has only the test collection with one record only. Okay, so now let's go back to our Unity and then type in the username test and the password test1234 and click on the login button. You see the username and password in the console. But now let's open our server. It has welcome test login. The user doesn't exist in the database. Create a new one. And the user and password match. Accept user test. Alright. Okay. Let's open the MongoDB Compass and refresh it. You can see a new collection, namely user here. We have a new user name, test, and the encoded password. Looks good. Okay, let's test this one more time. Open our Unity, rerun our client, Now this time I'll type in the username test and the password test, which is an invalid password. Click login button and let's open our server. You see it throw an exception here, error when handle the request form session 2. Here is the username test, password test. Okay, and you can see a mark ID collection in our database, which in charge of incrementing the maximum ID for our user collection. That is basically how we handle the login request in our server, and that's all I want to show you today. In the next video, I'll show you how to handle the login response from our server in the Unity client, and see you next time. Cheers!